Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Happy Hump Day. And we are here for our third quarter webinar, What is the Future of the Appraisal Profession? I should be joined by some credit union clients as well as appraisers. My name is Sally Carruthers. I am CEO President of True Union Appraisal Services. A couple of housekeeping items. Everyone on the call is muted. If you have any comments, questions, anything else, please feel free to email me. My email address will be at the end of the call. Typically, our webinars run for about 45 minutes to an hour. It will not be longer than an hour, but maybe closer to 45 minutes. What I am talking about can be thought of as a little controversial, both on, particularly on the side of appraisers. I do not mean to point fingers, be accusatory. The whole point of this is really just to bring up some items that are topics of discussion and see where we're moving as an appraisal profession. So with that said, let's move on through the webinar and look at the future. There has been a lot of talk about the appraisal profession. It's been in the media, newspapers, and on television, really revolving around accusations of appraisal bias. And that has spurred comments about how our profession is structured and how the appraisal process goes about. So, one of the questions is, are we going to have some major changes? Are we on the precipice of that changes, or really just a reorganization of existing structures? I have been an appraiser for many, many years, and every now and then these topics come up and we see some changes sometimes we don't see anything. But quite honestly, in the time I have been appraising, no major changes, except probably, after 1989 with FIREA, but nothing major after that. But even, as I remember, I was an appraiser back in 1989. That actually happened pretty quickly. So we will see how things go and what will be done. So let's chat about some of the uncertainty that we have in the appraisal profession right now. You'd have to be living under a rock to not to know that there have been accusations of racial bias in the appraisal industry. And they kind of revolve often around folks that, and I think a lot of this is being measured and is there, and I think probably goes to a more long-standing kind of bias in residential real estate markets, and a reflection of that, but also has been spurred really by the lack of diversity we have in the appraisal profession. And that is an absolute thing that we can't argue against. And when you have a lack of diversity, we're open to accusations of potential racial bias, particularly when we don't see investment in minority areas, and there are situations of where individuals are pointing towards bias. So that is a major part, and we will talk about that. With that, a lot of the blame has been put at the feet of the Appraisal Foundation, and it brings into question the future of the Appraisal Foundation, and with that, the validity of USPAP. And we have, as appraisers, as users of appraisal services, we rely on USPAP, but there are some flaws, and we will discuss that. I don't think anyone really disagrees that there needs to be some changes to appraisal qualifications. And the situation of appraisal capacity was particularly brought to light in the last 2 years when we had an influx of mortgage applications with a refinance boom, and it was difficult to find appraisers, and that situation has changed right now. But I think there are barriers to getting into the profession, and those also impact our ability to have a diverse appraisal population. There has been call for maybe federal oversight of the appraisal industry rather than state, so we will discuss that. I'll discuss some of the technology and effectiveness of that technology, and where we are with that, and where we will see ourselves go. And then desktop appraisals and differing appraisal formats, alternates for the traditional appraisal that we have seen come to light in the last 12 months or so. So those are kind of the uncertain things that we have going on in the appraisal profession right now, and things that people are looking to address. So having said that, let's look at have an honest appraisal of appraiser bias. The question is there really overwhelming proof for real incidences of appraisal bias? And what is the burden of proof and who decides? There have been many examples of this in the media, and they usually kind of revolve around a minority person couple who have an appraisal done, and then they remove all the things. They have another appraisal done, removing all indications that that it is a minority living there, and the appraisal goes up. So I think there's some validity to that, but also I'm not sure where the burden of proof is, and I don't know how we're measuring appraisal bias. I know that the secondary market players, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, are looking to try and measure some of that bias. They will be kind of looking at appraisals based on census tract, and I think we're going to see some of that too. So many appraisers I've heard say, hey, on those appraisals, let me have a look at them and see, is there bias or isn't there? I think what we can agree on, that over time, and there is definite proof of this, that there has been a lack of investment in minority areas, and some of that is fueled by a lack of valuation in those areas and access to lending. So the old areas that were originally redlined are perhaps still redlined, because of the lack of lending and investment in those areas. Whether that is a result of valuation, or is that a result of an inherent bias that's built into residential real estate markets? And are there unfair housing standards that are reflected in those lower values? In other words, putting the blame just at the feet of the appraisers may not be enough. There are many other participants in this, from real estate agents to lenders to a lot of other people that probably are contributing to this bias. But it is an important factor. It has to be looked at, and of course we are always going to open ourselves up to this when we have a lack of diversity in our industry. So, my last question, does appraisal methodology reflect inherent bias in residential markets? We rely on the sales comparison approach. The sales comparison approach essentially is a reflection of the market, and is there an inherent bias in that market too? So these are some questions I think that it's only fair to ask. But on the other side, and I'm trying to be fair on this, that I do think that appraisers do need to be much more aware of fair housing, and there needs to be greater access to learning objectives on that. So, we do need to be cognizant of that. So there is no doubt that the appraisal profession is a white male aging population, right? Um, we have mostly men. I think I've got some statistics later on, and it's mostly male, and they are getting older. There is no doubt about that. And this ignites that accusation of appraisal bias. And, you know, it kind of, I was thinking about this when I was writing this class, and one of the things I was interested in was how, you know, 15 years ago, we were accused of bias, you know, because of appraiser pressure. And that's where the independence things came into effect. And now the other side is racial bias. And in I think there are definitely some bad players out there, but you know, I think this concept that our profession needs to be managed, you know, regulated even more is interesting. That somewhere along the line, you know, we seem not to be, we're viewed as not being particularly, I don't know, of a high level, which I find interesting. And I think what comes out of that is that, you know, this idea of whoever wants to be an appraiser, you know, and I don't think that because there isn't a general, you know, I don't a high opinion of us, that people don't want to be an appraiser. It's not somebody that, you know, you don't go to, you know, you're not sitting in college going, oh, yeah, I can't wait to graduate because I want to be an appraiser. It is a profession, but who's thinking of being it? Who wants to be it? Unless you're, you know, your parents are appraisers, or you have family members, or you know someone. So, you know, and I think that's a kind of weird kind of thing. And we're going to talk about the profession too, and why there is this barrier. And I think appraising is very one-dimensional, and we tend to kind of look at it. And I think the controls over the profession are really interesting and you know, open to criticism, particularly when we get to when we look at the role of the appraisal foundation and individual states, and why there is a lack of consistency with the oversight of the appraisal profession. So who would want to be an appraiser? I mean, this is a big question. There are lots of barriers, lots of things that people don't. There is a lack of opportunity in underserved. If you're a young person in college and you're thinking of different professions, you know, you want to be a, I don't know, software programmer or an engineer or an accountant, or you know, you're looking at what your future would be, and it's not going to be the same as when you go into that profession. There has to be opportunity, and I think our profession is stagnant unless, you know, you are a person who wants to start a business and grow that business, and have that certain kind of entrepreneurial spirit. And even that has barriers to owning an appraisal firm and growing that appraisal firm. There is generally kind of a lack of opportunity. There are movements that maybe you could work for a bank and work your way up, or an appraisal management company, but opportunities are pretty few and far between. It is a very difficult profession to get into, and actually very easy to get booted out of. It's terribly difficult, no doubt about it. I think I've heard this, that it's harder to get into the appraisal profession than be a pilot. And I'm not quite sure how those two kind of would coincide. And then you get booted out pretty easily. You do something, you muck up on an appraisal report, or I don't know, a homeowner decides to, you know, file some kind of complaint against you, that's investigated, they find an error in the report, you're sanctioned, then you're blacklisted, and all of a sudden your business is gone. So yeah, it's tough. It's not. It is a profession that's rife with bureaucracy, and there is no conformity. You know, all the things that you might have to do in one state are different from another state. The stuff you have to do for one lender is different from another lender. There's no consistency, and there is a lot of bureaucracy. And overall, the profession is very slow to embrace technology. Part of that stagnation, I think, has to do with the fact that we are using outdated forms, and because we've had these forms in place and they haven't been changed, we've carried on using the same technology to write appraisal reports. It's clunky, it takes time, it's slow. And with that, we have processes that just involve ridiculously time-consuming tasks that are, I think, of taking comp photos, which is, in my opinion, the biggest waste of time that appraisers have to do. And there's a lot of that in our processes that make it just time-consuming and sometimes just kind of boring. And then with that, what is the risk-reward? You know, appraisers who kind of are self-employed, make their own business, they make money based on how many appraisals they do. But if it takes time and there are clunky processes, is that risk-reward out there for anybody? So yeah, it doesn't sound too good, does it? So how do we get into get a more diverse you know, appraisal population? Well, right now the statistics aren't good. 98% of appraisers are white and 70% are men, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I guess that's the noted one that makes it right. And of course, that lack of diversity makes us susceptible to arguments of appraisal bias. And I think we have to look at the role of the Appraisal Foundation in all this. And I don't mean to attack the foundation, and it may sound like I am, but I think it is an institution that has that bears some kind of blame in what we have right now. As you, certainly all the appraisers on this call know, it's a nonprofit organization that has congressional authority to make rules on appraisal licensure and best practice. So those rules come into effect through the appraisal qualifications. They set minimum qualifications that the states have to use under congressional authority in licensing appraisers. In other words, they write the requirements. If you have to have 300 hours of appraisal classroom experience, those come out of the Appraisal Foundation. If you have to have, and they're set in stone. How you know, the amount of experience, etc. Then on the other side, they also kind of write USPAP, which it has to do with best practice, and that is then made law in each of the states, and that's how they oversee appraisers in those states. So they have tremendous power, you know, over every appraiser, lenders, and the state regulatory authority. What the foundation says goes, as far as ongoing regulation, how appraisals are completed, and all kinds of things. So, you know, one example, you know, we always get is, can we transfer this appraisal to someone else's name? One lender to another. It seems like a pretty simple thing to do, right? The borrower has gone with another lender, you know, that seems pretty straightforward. But no, we can't do that because USPAP says we have to create a new assignment. Every assignment is driven by a client And so sometimes it gets really complicated to do things that seem very straightforward. So we'll talk also a little about that state oversight, that they have to rule by USPAP, but USPAP changes, and there are changes year over year. So for the states to keep up with that becomes really kind of difficult. And then nobody really has the authority to challenge what the foundation is doing. Yes, they put things out to public comment, public exposure, the qualifications in the draft. They have full, I guess, openness on everything. They have public meetings. Anybody can go. They can put their advice in. There are different councils as part of advisory councils. The states have one. Industry, the lenders have one. So they have their input. But in the end, it is the foundation that makes that, through their boards, that make it the final argument. And then there is this argument that they have exploited the benefits written into by FIREA and Dodd-Frank. And with that, the financial benefits, I guess, of what they have. So, of course, they have USPAP. They publish USPAP. It's published by the Appraisal Foundation. Right now, it's on a biannual cycle, although it has been delayed a year because of COVID. Appraisers have to do 7 As of USPAP every couple of years by regulation. And, you know, the reiterations, the different reiterations of USPAP are often confusing. USPAP is confusing. It is not a really specific document. And I think there are definitely issues. It lacks a lot of definitions. I think with the different reiterations, there is a difficulty for the states to implement these differences. It is used to regulate appraisers. So it's used to discipline them, but it fails as a legal document because it hasn't got that specificity and it is open to interpretation. So a state may discipline an appraiser based on a particular iteration of USPAP, but later on USPAP will change, but the appraiser's discipline still stands based on that iteration. Also, the interpretation of USPAP by a state may not be right, but they have to continue with that interpretation because it's going to get repeated and repeated with other appraisers. So it is really open to interpretation and probably just fails as that kind of legal document. So also there's the appraisal qualification criteria that the Appraisal Foundation is responsible for. They set the minimum standards, and those standards up until now have created a barrier there is no doubt about this. There is no argument on this as far as I'm concerned. It's created a barrier to entry and it's promoted a lack of diversity. And with that has impeded growth and advancement, and I think supports the cottage industry environment. That cottage industry environment, I think, is the thing that really stops the entry of appraisers into the profession. The main problem I see with the qualifications are probably that experience requirement, and it's from both sides. You have a young person who wants to get into the profession, and they might get all their classes done, might have a degree, and then they have to go work for an appraiser. They have to be supervised by an appraiser. Well, that appraiser may work for themselves or be in a small firm. The environment they work in is probably not good. They may be working in their basement or whatever it is, and you've got this young person who's supposed to be mentored by this appraiser, and the system isn't working right now. It doesn't work, and we've seen that. We don't have folks getting into the profession, and you know, I always kind of joke. I said, you know, you're a college girl, you're a young lady or a young guy coming out of college, and you want to go work for the creepy guy in his basement, you know, doing appraisals, and that's what it is right now. So we've clung on to this experience requirement, that's legacy, and I think it's had a problem promoting people into the profession, but particularly people of color. I think that I I actually own an appraisal management company. I've worked in appraisal management for many, many years. But I think appraisal management companies, and you're all the appraisers here will laugh at this, I think they bear responsibility for this too. I think that in particular, you know, they were created really to ensure appraisal independence. And we manage the process for quality and service, and we allow lenders to abdicate that responsibility. And, you know, therefore they don't have to employ people to do that. And we do it very well. We have the technology to do it. We have the expertise to do it, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that the input of appraisal management companies kind of helped to facilitate this kind of cottage industry that we have, and flattened fees, and really took away that role of what was the appraisal firm, which was able to really bring appraisers into the profession. The larger appraisal firms helped to, you know, they allowed for mentorship and growth of trainees, and then a path really to a career. And some of that has gone. And I have to put the blame on that, the unintended consequence of that, you know, may come from the appraisal management company. The other thing I think that's very important is that the role, the presence of the appraisal management company makes appraisers kind of abdicate that relationship that they have with their client. And so we kind of have this profession that, yes, they have a client, but they never see the client, they never have any relationship with that client. The relationship is with the appraisal management company, and there probably isn't a relationship. I love the appraisers on our panel, but very few of them do I ever talk to. They really just get their order from the system and blah, blah, blah. So that is not a great kind of scenario to really attract some kind of people, you know, people kind of persons into the profession. It just makes it very, very different from what it used to be. You know, in the old days when I appraised and I knew, you know, everyone in the bank and everyone in the credit union, and I had relationships with my clients, I knew the realtors, and yeah, sometimes there were issues, sometimes people pushed on value, but for a people person, it was a great kind of, it was fun. It was a good kind of interaction, I think. So now I think we have a different scenario that attracts, that prevents that person entering the profession. So, you know, with all this, there have definitely been movements, and that goes to the highest level of government right now, on ideas to both change the profession in the light of potential bias, but you know, really kind of examine some of the things that are going on. So earlier this year, an organization was formed called the Property Appraisal and Valuation Equity Task Force, PAVE. And it was convened by President Biden and led by the Housing and Urban Development Secretary. They proposed an action plan, which you can get on their website. And it is a very interesting document, and has a lot of interesting kind of things. I think it's worth looking at. Numerous changes on how appraisers are trained and how appraisers are conducted in the field and how it's supervised. Some interesting things I think are positive. You know, that it does call for value estimate ranges. I am all for that. I think that is a great idea. But it does call for an expanded use of alternates to traditional appraisals. I don't know if that's going to go on more than it has. I think one interesting thing is an alternate or modification of the traditional sales comparison approach. I don't know how they're going to do that or how they propose to do that, and I don't think there has been a lot of thought into that. But I think another thing I find interesting is this public sharing of aggregated appraisal data. I think that appraisers should have the ability to have more access to data, whether it is the data of other appraisals being completed in the market, or just the data from Fannie and Freddie. I think there are some real advantages to us having that, to see what our peers are doing. And you know, too often when we review an appraisal and we look at the SSR from the lender, we'll see something like, you know, appraisers' adjustments are not the same as their peers. Well, they don't know what their peers are doing. I mean, and I think this is one of the issues. Appraisers work in the dark. They don't know what other people are doing. But if you had access to see what other people are doing, I think it would be really good and would improve consistency in what we do. So what are the potential for changes? Well, in March, there was a discussion of a proposed act, which is the Fair Appraisal and Inequity Reform Act. This has not yet been introduced and is unlikely to be, actually. The idea of it is pretty far-reaching. It would that would replace the Appraisal Foundation and Appraisal Subcommittee with a federal valuation agency, and create more fair housing training, registry of appraisals. Again, there's that appraisal data I would like to see, and establish harsher penalties for discrimination. Quite honestly, I don't think this has the legs to go anywhere. It's not being introduced. There is no co-sponsor from the Republican side, and obviously if it hasn't even been introduced, it's not going to be passed before the midterms. And I think with the midterms that up in the air, I'm not sure this will go anywhere. But I think it is interesting that it has been discussed and it is there, and obviously there is some movement that on thoughts of appraisal. So just something there. Valuation technology. First thing to note for you appraisers out there, AVMs have become much more accurate, and I think, you know, lenders want to know this too, but I just want to make that aware to appraisers. We've been talking about AVMs for over 20 years probably, and one of the issues, originally they were based on public data. That data was not really accurate. AVMs have become a lot more sophisticated. And so I think that, and the other thing is that, especially over the last few years, the residential real estate market has become a lot more homogenous. And the investor purchases in the market have taken out some of that emotion. So I think that that combination of things has helped these AVMs become more accurate. But having said that, I think on the valuation technology side, residential appraisal process remains very time consuming and lacking in technology process. You still basically type out a report. Terribly time consuming. I think data access is still limited. It remains with the MLS system. It would improve a lot more if you had access to other appraisers' data, Fannie Mae data. The biggest advantage in technological advances probably for the appraisers' mobile technology. The fact that you can take a phone or a iPad, whatever, into the field and work in the field and have access to data anywhere. I think that mobile technology, there has been a delayed, obviously, development of these new residential appraisal forms. I am told, or I think it's next year or the year after, and I think once those are in place, we're going to see some nice advances in technology, efficiency, and production. The forms actually will not change that much, but the way that you complete them will, and it'll be a lot more like I guess a TurboTax kind of situation, and hopefully I think it will speed up for our clients out there some turn times when we have access to that technology. It would be a good thing. Alternates, and we talk about this. What are the alternates to traditional appraisal reports? This has been talked about, especially over the last couple of years, where there were real capacity issues, appraiser capacity issues. Appraiser capacity has been relieved right now. I can tell you that. It is, appraisers are not worked off their feet like they were. The capacity issues were really there because of the amount of originations going on, because of loan productivity. So that capacity has been relieved. There are some of our appraisers are still really busy, depending on areas. I think they stay more steady because we work with credit unions. Credit unions are not as up and down as some of the large lenders and that kind of thing. So that capacity has been issued. But look, if it wasn't for the alternates to traditional appraisals over the last couple of years, I don't think that lenders would have been able to make loans. And really the appraisal waivers have helped. And I think they're going to gain more popularity. The thing about appraisal waivers, appraisers don't realize you've got to have data to create an appraisal waiver. It's necessary, therefore, to have traditional appraisals to create that data for the appraisal waivers to work. So we're not going to get rid of traditional appraisals. Desktop appraisals are here to stay, just the way it is. Not a big fan. I'm not a fan because I think because of the way that the requirements for them and the way they've been put into place. I'd be fine with it if you didn't have to have photos of everything. The problem I have with desktop appraisals is the necessity to have a buy-in from homeowner or borrower or realtor to get the information. So, but they are here to stay, and they're being used, not often by credit unions, and I see why. The idea of some of these alternates is that, hey, it removes that appraiser bias. But then you're still relying on data that has that potential for bias. So I'm not quite sure how that works. These alternates are based on risk, and I think that with the elevated prices we've seen in the last couple of years, we may see an increase in repurchases by Fannie and Freddie. So what that does to the whole kind of risk appetite of lenders, I think is fairly interesting and may kind of quell some of the use of these alternate valuations out there. So The changing face of the appraisal industry. We will see some changes. I have no doubt. Right now, we're seeing changes. I have seen more appraisal firms. Yay! I'm big on appraisal firms, really, because it helps people cut into. And I think as fees have climbed, it's allowed the growth, and I see some of the firms taking up the initiative of diversity and bringing new appraisers into the profession. On the other side, there has definitely been an increase in appraiser retirement. We have dealt, and I think part of that was COVID. Many older appraisers just said, I've had enough, I'm not going to go through it, and we've seen a lot of that happening. I think we're going to see a more diverse and, importantly, a younger population of appraisers. And hopefully, with some changes to appraiser qualifications, better fees, growth of the appraisal firm, we're going to see that. But I think there's still going to be an issue in rural areas with fewer appraisers, and I think probably fewer family-based appraisal businesses. I think also we're going to see more college graduates in the appraisal field. I know more colleges are picking up appraisal classes and putting them into their involving them in their classes and into their curriculum. So I think we're going to see that more college graduates coming out and becoming appraisers, especially as there becomes hopefully more growth and more advancement for appraisers, opportunities. Oops, went the wrong way. So one thing before I kind of finish up that I need to talk about are reconsiderations of value. These are pain points. It is a pain point for both appraisers and users of appraisal services. My credit unions out there, I know it's a pain point to you guys, and my appraisers out there. Nobody would like to get a reconsideration of value. And I think there's just a general kind of recognition that they lack uniformity, transparency, and consistency. Our credit union clients say, oh, sometimes they're just a waste of time because the appraiser will just add a generic comment or whatever. And the appraisers are like, oh my gosh, I've already explained this in the appraisal report. I've done this already. Why do I have to deal with this? So here's my thing. I do think that appeals are part of any professional service, and that's essentially what a reconsideration is. It's an appeal, but around that there should be some kind of standardization, and I think it's very important that as a profession we look at this very seriously and have a standard reconsideration. We decide who's going to actually initiate this reconsideration. Should it really be a borrower who essentially is not an intended user of the appraisal report? But then legally, do they rely on there are a whole different kind of questions on this. And I think with that uniformity, we would kind of deal with some of the questions of appraiser pressure and independence. I am a believer that in some cases it's necessary to get a second opinion. It used to be that we had the concept that second opinion was value shopping. I don't agree with that anymore. I think that a lot of different professions, a second opinion is valued. If you get diagnosed with something, sometimes it's worth getting a second opinion. And I think that sometimes there is validity for a second opinion. I used to offer our clients appraisal reviews. Now, especially when I can see some potential flaws in an appraisal, I do offer a second opinion rather than go through a costly review, which is sometimes not accurate. And I think it kind of has become a component in that appraisal process. So you know, you guys who are credit unions out there, that don't be afraid of asking for that. Unless there's a huge flaw, you're going to have to pay for it, though, or the borrower's going to have to pay for it. But that's the same as any other second opinion. Somebody has to pay for it. But I think there's validity to it. Some conclusions on this. Managed to get this done fairly quickly. That's good. I think that and these are my opinions. It's my webinar, they're my opinions, but you may not like that, but I'm trying to be fair on it. Appraisal capacity issues, I think, were very related to increased loan productivity. There are some markers that still remain at risk and should be looked at, but some have become relieved, and so that has helped, I think, with service, turn times, and that type of thing. I think we're going to see changes to appraisal qualifications with less barriers to entering the profession. In particular, we're going to see some changes to that appraisal experience criteria part of it. Appraisers are going to have to receive, and they will receive, more fair housing training. The new USPAP includes that, USPAP training includes that, and there's going to be more scrutiny. And that scrutiny will result in, I think, some disciplinary action sometimes, and maybe penalties for appraisers, you know, the bad actors out there, if it can be proved that there has been some form of discrimination. I think we're seeing a resurgence of the appraisal firm. And that's good. I think that allows opportunities for new appraisers getting into the profession. Like to see that. Valuation alternatives will stay, but I don't think they will replace the traditional appraisal. I think they will be there. They help. You guys couldn't, appraisers in the room, you guys could not have stood the last 2 years without those alternates being there. I think they're sophisticated, they're valued, they're worth it, but they will not replace that traditional appraisal firm. There's no doubt that the future of the appraisal foundation and USPAT remains in question. One of the things I think about some of the changes we've had in our profession, and we kind of thought that nothing would change, and then all of a sudden somebody pops something into a bill about this, and we may not have the particular valuation act that we talked about, but it only takes a few lines in another bill for this to happen. And I think that, you know, the someone with enough, you know, want or need may do that, which would change our profession quite considerably. New technology will come about from changes in the appraisal form. And I think there's going to be greater transparency in the process, particularly around reconsiderations of value. I would love to see a registry of appraisals in some way, or access to data from appraisals. I think that would have a huge advantage to us. So are we on the precipice of major change? I don't think so. Things happen very slowly in the appraisal profession, but don't be surprised if something all of a sudden happens, and you know, for most of you, things are just going to go along, but we never know. So with that, here is my email address. It is scarruthers@treeunion.net. I thank everybody for being here this morning. Everybody stay safe out there. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Hopefully I haven't offended anybody. Try not to, but I think it's interesting times. So thank you for joining us this morning, and we will talk later.